Chapter 1: The Mystery in Plain Sight. Tonight, you're walking beside a city that doesn't know it's about to hold its breath. It's February 28th, 1986. Stockholm is cold in a way that feels personal. Icy air tucked under your collar, streetlights smeared by thin mist, the road shining like a muted film set. Far from hidden rooms and masked faces, the threat is happening in the open, on Sveavägen, one of the city's most well-traveled streets. You're not watching a villain fade into darkness. You're watching history happen in real time. An assassination of a head of state, shot dead in public, and then, almost immediately, the case begins to slip. Because even after decades, the question still lands the same way, heavy and unanswered. Who pulled the trigger, and why did the system fail to prove it? The street goes quiet, the sirens eventually arrive, but the certainty never does. Chapter 2: Who was Olof Palme? You begin where the timeline can't explain everything, with the man. Olof Palme, late 50s, Scandinavian, receding gray-brown hair, glasses that catch the streetlight. He carries himself like someone used to being watched. Tonight it shows a tiredness beneath the dignity. Not weakness, just the weight of years spent in public life, navigating applause and outrage in equal measure. Olof Palme wasn't just a prime minister. He was a symbol, sometimes a beacon, sometimes a target. His politics were bold. He spoke in a way that made people feel seen, especially those who lived on the margins. Internationally, he questioned power without flinching. Domestically, he pushed a kind of Sweden that many loved for its fairness and many resented for its control. And because Palme stood so visibly between people and the forces shaping their lives, governments abroad, tensions at home, he accumulated enemies as surely as he gained supporters. Security, though, didn't match the level of risk. Not in the way you'd expect from a world leader with that kind of profile. You can feel the consequence in the smallest details. The casual rhythms, the assumption that daylight logic could survive in night conditions. When the investigation later turns into an argument about evidence, about timing, about trust, you realize something unsettling. The murder wasn't just an event. It was also an exposure. It exposed how fragile certainty can be when assumptions outrun preparation. The night on Sveavägen. Now you step into the moment itself. Lisbeth Palme walks beside him, early 50s, shoulder-length light brown hair, a warm winter coat that contrasts against the dark streets. Her expression is worried, serious, like someone trying to read the evening before anything goes wrong. In your mind, the scene repeats the way a nightmare repeats. The couple returning from the cinema, the city's noise fading into the quiet between buildings. Olof keeps moving, steady, familiar, almost ordinary, like a man who believes routine is protection. Then the street changes. On Sveavägen, the air is cold enough to make sound travel strangely. Footsteps become louder than they should be. Every shadow looks like it's hiding something. The lighting is dim and unforgiving. Cold pools of illumination with places you can't see into. You don't see a dramatic escape route. You see what happens when the world is interrupted too quickly to understand. A sudden burst of action, and then the return of silence. Except silence never really returns. Not fully. Olof Palme collapses in the open, in front of witnesses who can't agree on details, can't hold on to the same version of what they saw, and can't stop time from moving forward. And Lisbeth Palme there in the aftermath feels like the center of the storm. Serious, alert, trying to grasp what has just been taken, trying to make sense of a reality that doesn't match the rules the country lives by. In documentary footage and later testimony, the night stays hazy. Not because people don't care, but because trauma scrambles memory. The clock keeps going while the story fights to form. Chapter 4: The Botched Investigation. Once the shooting is over, you expect resolution. Instead, you get fragments. The investigation is often described as slow and chaotic. Response time stretched, communication tangled, evidence that should have been secured treated like it could be handled later. The kind of mistakes that don't happen in movies. Because in real life, people believe the right thing will turn up again. But in a case like this, the right thing doesn't turn up again. It disappears. A murder weapon that might have been crucial is missing or lost from the trail. Items that could connect a suspect to a scene are questioned, mismanaged, or not preserved with the rigor the moment demanded. Lead after lead becomes another argument about credibility rather than a path toward proof. And then the pressure grows because the investigation isn't just finding answers, it's defending itself too. You see the patterns that haunt true crime stories: internal feuds, shifting theories, the uncomfortable possibility that important information was handled wrong early on when it mattered most. The case becomes not only a search for the shooter, but a battle over who can still claim they were on solid ground. Somewhere inside this mess, the public begins to lose trust, not instantly, but gradually, like light fading behind fog. And in that fog, suspects start to look inevitable. Chapter 5: Suspects and Theories That Won't Let Go. At first, you follow one name because the system points there. Christer Pettersson, gaunt man in his 40s, pale skin under cold, shadowy lighting, short, dark hair, hollow cheeks, and eyes that feel too intense to be harmless. He looks like someone the night would recognize without explaining why. His story is tangled with conviction, testimony, and the gap between courtroom certainty and street-level reality. Pettersson was convicted at one point, then acquitted later. For many viewers, that sequence becomes a turning point, proof that the case could not reliably translate suspicion into truth. You're left staring at the same hard question: if the evidence was strong enough to convict, what weakened it afterward? If testimony convinced some, why didn't it convince others with the same certainty? But Pettersson is only one doorway. Another is a man who looks like the opposite of a threat. Stig Engström, often called Skandiamannen, middle-aged, balding, glasses, dressed in an ordinary 1980s office suit and coat. He has an unremarkable appearance, the kind you might pass on a sidewalk without remembering. Cold and calmness aren't the same thing, but Stig's presence in the investigation becomes a chilling contrast. A person who could blend into crowds, who could be overlooked even while standing near the story's edge. The Skandiaman theory ties Engström to the time and place of the killing, built from a web of observations and interpretations, some compelling to followers of the case, others rejected by critics who see gaps where proof should be. And then there are the international leads, threads that tug at Palme's global reputation and the world politics swirling around Sweden in the 1980s. One of those threads points toward the PKK, toward Kurdish militancy and retaliatory possibilities. It's a theory that gains force when you remember Palme's public stance on conflicts and his willingness to speak into international disputes, rather than stay comfortably neutral. Another thread links the case to South Africa's apartheid era, the kind of geopolitical tension where pressure, anger, and underground networks don't require Hollywood melodrama to be dangerous. Palme's criticism of apartheid made him visible to those who benefited from it. And finally, there's a darker category of theory that some people never let go of: police involvement theories. Ideas that suggest the system might have protected itself, compromised its evidence, or quietly steered the investigation away from the truth. You have to understand why these theories survive. Not because everyone agrees, but because the timeline and the handling of evidence invite doubt. Incomplete answers create room for multiple stories to grow roots. Chapter 6: 2020, the case closed, but not the doubt. In 2020, the case reaches a kind of conclusion, at least in official language. Engström is named as the person responsible, and he is already dead. No trial can happen. No cross-examination can tighten loose ends. No final courtroom clarity can force witnesses and evidence to align under a judge's scrutiny. So the closure isn't a full stop. It's more like a curtain drawn across an unfinished stage. In your mind, you watch the documentary reframe what came before. The story becomes solved according to investigators, but the feeling around it remains complicated, because the method of closure matters. The absence of a trial means the public doesn't get the final moment of adjudication. Instead, it gets an argument summarized. And if you've followed this case for years, if you've listened to the conflicting claims about timing, evidence, and credibility, you understand why many people remain unconvinced. Official closure doesn't automatically erase unanswered questions. Why were certain crucial elements mishandled early on? Why did major leads fail to solidify into unquestionable proof? How do you weigh decades of interpretation against the missing pieces that never returned? What the state can declare, The public still tries to test in the mind, like stepping through a dark hallway and hoping the shape you saw earlier will still match what you see now. Chapter 7: Why This Haunts Sweden. You end back where the story began, in the open air, under cold lights, on a street that should have felt safe. Olof Palme, a dignified man in a winter coat, glasses catching dim streetlight, a leader who believed in a public life that could withstand the worst risks. Lisbeth Palme, worried, serious, trying to hold on to reality as it breaks apart. Christer Pettersson, a gaunt figure whose path through the justice system became a symbol of uncertainty. Stig Engström, ordinary on the outside, but transformed by theory into something far darker, an answer suggested, not tested. When Sweden talks about this case decades later, it isn't only about a death, because the murder happened in public and the truth did not. That mismatch is what lingers. Not just grief, not just anger, but a quiet, persistent unease. The feeling that in a modern country with institutions and rules, something can still go wrong in the most irreversible way. And as you leave the final frames of Sveavägen behind, you realize the haunting isn't only the question of who, it's also the question of how the answer could remain just out of reach, until history hardens, until witnesses age, until time turns evidence into interpretation. For some cases, time provides resolution. For this one, time provides atmosphere, and the atmosphere still asks you to look again.